Hey y'all, it's Kate from the Little Apothecary and welcome back to my channel. Today is another episode of my favorite 100 books read on Goodreads. This is the next 10 up. I will link the first video in the description below, episode 1, where I talked about the first set of 10. This is the second set of 10. I'm saying sets of 10 because they're not really in any kind of order. It's not like the top 10, 20, whatever. This is just the next set. So for each of these videos, I will be linking the previous episodes in the description below. So if you missed them, you can go back and look at the other episodes. As always, there's no order for this. These books are just some books that stood out on my 1,000+ books read on Goodreads over the years. So I'm just gonna jump right in because I went over all of the rules in the first video. So the theme for this video, besides favorite books read, the theme of these books kind of is nonfiction, memoirs, and historical fiction. Most of the books in this 10 group, it fits under those kinds of themes. So our first book up is Refuge, An Unnatural History of Family and Place by Terry Tempest Williams. This is a nonfiction memoir that deals with a lot of natural elements and the ecology, natural ecology and whatnot. And I first read this in grad school when I was writing my MFA thesis. A lot of people, various people that I talked to had recommended this book in relation to my thesis. This was first released in 1991, and a spoiler-free summary of the book is braided narratives of dying and accommodation. This memoir transforms tragedy into renewal and spiritual grace. Our first thread, it takes place in 1983. Williams has just learned that her mother was dying of cancer. They were both exposed to fallout from atomic bomb tests in the 1950s. And then our second thread, also in 1983, but a different theme, which is, this is where the nature comes in. The Great Salt Lake rises to record heights, but also is threatening many species of birds that Williams lives her life by. I really loved the balance of life and nature here. The way that she was able to balance those two threads and braid them into each other seamlessly was just incredible. So why is this on my list? Most of you out there that are watching this have probably never even heard of this book or Terry Tempest Williams, but for me, like I said, there was a delicate balance of nature and life with death, and I just loved how she was able to balance those. I loved how she used nature to process and deal with her own grief. And some quotes that I got from this: it started to rain in a peculiar sort of way. The weather gave us permission to cry. And if you've ever been going through depression and the weather is just so rainy and miserable that it feels like it matches your mood perfectly and it gives you that permission to cry, you know exactly what she's talking about. And then the other quote I have from Refuge is, an individual doesn't get cancer, a family does. And if you've ever had a loved one that has suffered from cancer, you know exactly what that means. A whole family goes through that experience, not just the one person diagnosed. Our next book up is another memoir, The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. This is, like I said, a nonfiction memoir, and this one is a little bit controversial because there are some things that are not good in this book, meaning topic-wise. The writing, I think, is amazing. This was released in 2005, and it's a memoir about resilience and redemption. A family that is both deeply dysfunctional and uniquely vibrant on its own. Our dad, when he's sober, he sparks imagination with his lessons in physics, geology, and embracing life fearlessly. The mother in this family, she just can't be bothered to parent. So the Walls children are forced to essentially take care of each other and raise each other. And they found their way to New York with their parents following behind and their parents chose homelessness even as their children were prospering, and it was just such an interesting family dynamic to read about. Why this one has made it on my list? It's powerful storytelling. The storytelling in this memoir is so good, especially for a nonfiction book. This is like epic fantasy storytelling levels. Its prose is very honest and raw and just hits you in all of the emotions. And it's told through the eyes of the age of the narrator. So as we go through this book, our narrator changes, she ages and she grows up. And so at different levels, we're at different ages. And the style of narration, the prose, changes with our narrator's age. And I love it when prose can reflect the age of the narrator like that. You might think it's obvious, but it's not always done like that. So I have just 2 quotes from The Glass Castle. Life is a drama full of tragedy and comedy. You should learn to enjoy the comedic episodes a little more. And sometimes you need a little crisis to get your adrenaline flowing and help you realize your potential. And I've been in those life ruts before where you're just kind of there going along with the paces and you're not really thinking about your potential and what you could be doing. And it takes a life crisis, like losing your job or a tragedy or something happening with people that you know, to really get you going in life. So I really, really loved that quote. Our next book up is another memoir. I promise they're not all memoirs, but this is a classic memoir, I think. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. This was released first in 1969, and it explores bigotry, rape, abandonment, prejudice, and survival. And along with prejudice, we also should throw in racism there, because a lot of times they're the same, but sometimes they're not quite the same thing. Maya Angelou's memoir examines the power of reading, self-love, self-care, and kindness, and how this leads to freedom. This memoir takes place between the ages of when she was 4 and 17, and it's actually the first in a series. I have not read the other books in this series, though I really want to, and preparing for this video has reminded me that I wanted to do that. Why this book is in this list: it's powerful, beautiful, lyrical writing. Maya Angelou writes like no one else. And it reads more like fiction, a lot like The Glass Castle. This book reads a lot like fiction. In fact, when I first read this book, I did not know that it was a memoir. I thought it was a very sad, beautifully written fictional book. So to take your life and be able to write it in a way that feels fictional but yet believable is incredible. It has prose that will stay with you forever. This book has not left my soul since I first read it. And I love the little glimpses of humor that Maya Angelou also injects into this powerful emotional story. It helps kind of balance out those really strong emotions and those terrible topics that are examined in here, with a little bit of humor to balance it all out, just like you need in life. I've got several quotes from this book because it's just so amazing. I couldn't choose just 1 or 2. Like most children, I thought if I could face the worst danger voluntarily and triumph, I would forever have power over that. And I felt that so many times as a kid. And yet, he loved me, and that just hit me straight to the core. If you've ever just felt so down on yourself, but you have that someone in life that will just champion you no matter what, that, to me, is one of the most powerful feelings in the world. The tears didn't soothe my heart as they usually did. Through food, we learned that there were other people in the world. And that one I could really relate to because I grew up in a pretty isolated town in the middle of the country in upstate New York, where I knew kind of that there were, other cultures around, but I didn't know really anything about them until I started trying different foods from different cultures. And school events helped a lot with this because they started bringing in different cultures. And I learned about these other people throughout the world just based on their foods. And it's such a fun way to learn about other cultures as a kid. So our next book up is a book that is so hard for me to talk about, but it's something that deserves to be on this list, on everyone's list, even if this is one of those books that every single person should read at some point in their life. That's Night by Elie Wiesel. This is a memoir, nonfiction, translated, released in 1956. I first read this, I want to say in middle school, and it has stayed with me ever since. This book for me is what the Diary of Anne Frank is for a lot of people. It's kind of our first true experience into the Holocaust and Holocaust survivors. And honestly, this book has affected me more than reading the Diary of Anne Frank affected me. A spoiler-free summary of this memoir. So Elie Wiesel was born in Transylvania, and he was just a teenager when he and his family were taken to Auschwitz concentration camp in 1944, and then to Buchenwald. This memoir is his record of memories of the death of his family, the death of his own innocence and despair as a deeply observant Jew, confronting the absolute evil of man. But it's also about finding hope in the darkest times. Why is this book on my list of top favorite 100 reads? Because it's one of, like I said, one of the first books that moved me to tears while reading, and I was just in middle school when I read this. Some people who have read this book, and I tell them that, they think that middle school is too young to read a book like this, but I disagree because it made me want to be a better person. And if you can get that at an earlier age, why not? I feel like it would make the world a better place if more people read this book when they were still in those impressionable years. And as you can see already from when I'm describing the book, it's an incredibly moving account of the Holocaust. Like I said, for me, this book affected me more than the Diary of Anne Frank. This is my Diary of Anne Frank. Not to diminish the Diary of Anne Frank at all, because that is an incredible book on its own right, but this book just changed my life. Some quotes from this book. I wept because of something inside me that felt the need for tears. If you've ever been in those moments where you just feel like you need to cry, you don't need a reason to do it, you just need to cry, that's those moments. To this day, whenever I hear Beethoven played, my eyes close, and out of the darkness rises the sad, pale face of my Polish friend as he said farewell on his violin to an audience of dying men. And that gives me tears just reading that out loud. Just remembering that scene is one of the most emotional, powerful scenes that I've ever read. Our next book up goes along with the Holocaust World War II theme, and that is The Book Thief by Marcus Zuckus. This is a historical fiction book, so we're going a little bit away from the memoirs, at least for now. This book was released in 2005. It takes place in 1939 in Nazi Germany, and our main character, Liesel, begins a love affair with books. I love it. When she takes the gravedigger's handbook that was left near her brother's grave. Her foster father teaches her how to read, and she soon starts stealing books from Nazi book burnings. My kind of girl. Why this one is on my list is a hauntingly beautiful story. I keep thinking about it even years after reading it for the first time. Our characters wring the emotions out of you. They just take your emotions, take your emotional welfare, and just wring it out. This is, unlike some other World War II historical fiction books, in this one, it felt more like World War II was just a backdrop to the story itself. Like, this is just an engine to drive the greater story. And I love it when historical fiction can use the history like that. And it makes you ask questions of yourself, like, what would I do in this situation? Some quotes from The Book Thief. The book thief wanted desperately to go back to the basement to write or to read through her story one last time. Burning words were torn from their sentences, and that image just stayed in my head forever. She was a girl in Nazi Germany. How fitting that she was discovering the power of words. And without words, the Fuhrer was nothing. And that's so true about Hitler. He used his words as power, and without words, he wouldn't have that power. Next book up is a classic nonfiction, not quite a memoir, more like we have a long essay or short book, about a little bit more than 100 pages. And I think they're actually supposed to be 2 letters. That is The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. This was released in 1963, and it's a powerful evocation of James Baldwin's early life in Harlem and a disturbing examination of the consequences of racial injustice. This is a hugely important piece of literature in the civil rights movement. I don't use the word hugely often because a lot of people question whether it's a real word or not. I say it's a real word, but should only be used sparingly for its impact, but here I feel like it definitely needs it. Why is The Fire Next Time on my list? Because, I listened to the audiobook version of this, narrated by James Baldwin himself, and to listen to James Baldwin read these letters was so powerful and moving. It's a call to be better in life and in the world. And it not only gives us these civil rights problems, issues, but it provides solutions, which not every book like this will do that. Most books will call out the issues and pretend that they're giving solutions, but really those solutions are just more issues. But James Baldwin gives us solutions to these issues. And why are we still having these issues now in 2024? Because of people. Some quotes from the book. No one's hand can wipe away those tears he sheds invisibly today. If you don't let people see your hurt, they can't help you fix that hurt. When we were told to love everybody, I had thought that meant everybody. And this is something that I thought so many times as a kid when I learned of the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution and the Civil War and Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil Rights. I was like, if all men are created equal, how are we still having these problems? And we still have these problems in 2024. So I found The Fire Next Time so motivational. Our next book up is a historical fiction book going along with the Civil War and civil rights theme. This is The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. And this was released in 2016. And one of the things that I loved about this book is it captured my inner childhood. I'll talk about that in a minute when I talk about why this is on my list. First, let me give you a spoiler-free summary of this book. Our main character is Cora. She is a slave on a plantation in Georgia, and she's just entering adulthood. She escapes on the Underground Railroad with fellow slave Caesar, and she kills a young white boy and is hunted because of it. So she's hunted because she's an escaped slave and also because she's killed this white boy now. It's kind of like a modern day Gulliver's Travels with a new world at each of their stops on the Underground Railroad. And I say that because in this historical fiction book, the Underground Railroad is not a metaphorical thing. It is an actual Underground Railroad that takes them from the south to the north. And when I was a kid, I tried to convince my teacher that the Underground Railroad was a real railroad. I dreamed about this railroad like it was a real thing. And so when I read this book, it was a love letter to my childhood, essentially. And I saw Colson Whitehead speak a couple years ago at Duke, and when I got him to sign my copy, I told him this story, and he said, "Oh, so you're a truther." So there were other people out there just like me, and I loved that we could connect because of that experience. So that's part of my why this is on my list. The other part of why is because it has brilliant writing in it. Colson Whitehead's writing is just tremendous. It's got vibrant, realistic characters, and it's haunting. And during his talk that I saw him at Duke, one of the questions that he was asked about was, how does an author write a character that is different from them? And Colson Whitehead simply said, write the characters that you want to write. He was writing about a little girl. He's not a little girl, obviously, and he did brilliant at it. If you have those characters in your heart, he said, you can write them just as well as if you are those characters. Those characters will live inside you and tell you how to write them. And I loved his response to that question. Some quotes from the Underground Railroad. Her shadows had provided protection. If you want to see what this nation is all about, I always say you have to ride the rails. Look outside as you speed through, and you'll find the true face of America. And in her inventory of loss, people were not reduced to sums, but multiplied by their kindnesses. And I love that. I love the idea of remembering someone for the good that they did instead of the bad. Just that idea has stuck with me ever since. Our next book up is a contemporary fiction, maybe a little bit of romance, and was translated, which the translation was so good, I did not know it was translated when I first read it. That's The Little Paris Bookshop by Nina George. This one was released in 2013. Our main character, Monsieur Perdue, is a literary apothecary. Now you might be thinking, well, that is familiar. This is where I got my channel name from, this book. Monsieur Perdue owns a floating bookshop in a barge on the Seine River in France. He uses books to heal broken hearts and souls. And after he reads a letter from a long-lost love, Perdue goes on a journey with a best-selling author and a love-lorn Italian chef. It is a love letter to books and meant for anyone who believes in the power of stories. Why this is on my list? Obviously because of my channel name origin. I connected with Perdue in such a wonderful way. Monsieur Perdue's goal in life is to find the perfect book for each one of his characters. Sometimes he won't even sell a book to a person because he knows it's not the right book for them. And I love that about him, and I always believed that there is a perfect book for everyone. If you do not like reading, you haven't found the right book yet. The characters are so endearing to me and so realistic. And it's a book about books, and I love those kinds of books. Some quotes. The man had been blind since birth, but he said that he could see the world through the fragrant trails and traces that people's feelings and thoughts had left behind. I love that idea of our thoughts and our emotions and our feelings leaving trails behind us where we go. A stupid man is every woman's downfall. And he had always felt that books created a force field around him. He had never had to travel. His conversations with books had been sufficient. Now I have just 2 books left on this list for episode 2. Next up, we have another historical fiction book, and this book is special to me because I got to meet the author of this book. This is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This was released in 2014, which was my last year in my MFA, and that was when I got to meet Anthony Doerr, and it was right before, I think it was like right before he found out that he just won the Pulitzer Prize for this book. This book was something else. This one gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. So it's another World War II historical fiction, but it's so unique. Spoiler-free summary. When Marie-Laure is 12, Nazis occupy Paris. Marie and her family flee to a house by the sea with a gem from the museum that could change everything. But we also have an orphan German boy, Werner, who learns of news throughout the world via a radio from faraway places that he's never even imagined before. Like I said, so why is this one on my list? I met the author when I was in grad school, right before he was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. And then he went on to win the Pulitzer Prize for this book. And so this book has always had a special place in my heart. I loved the character development in this book. We have such rich character development and gut-wrenching moments where our characters are wondering how to do the right thing in occupied Nazi territory. On the one hand, Marie wants to save her family and the world, but she's blind. And on the other hand, we have Werner, who is recruited to help the Nazis, essentially. And the way that their two stories intertwine is just beautiful. And we have some really haunting imagery from this book. So, some quotes from All the Light We Cannot See. There are 1,000 metaphors, and all of them are inadequate. Just one of those moments where you have a lot of words in your head, but none are right for that moment itself. Her fingers walk the tightropes of sentences, and I love this image of Marie-Laure using the Braille to read. I just love that her fingers are walking the tightropes in these sentences. That image just is fantastic. And then the last quote from this book is, "To feel the sentences hoist her up and carry her somewhere else just tells you the power of reading." This was me as a kid reading and just being carried away to faraway places to escape. Now, the last book that I have on this episode is a classic. It's fictional, but also semi-autobiographical. That is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This was released in 1963, and it's about Esther Greenwood, who has a brilliant, beautiful, and enormously talented mind, and she's super successful, but she's slowly going under. We see Esther's breakdown as it is our own, and it's a deep dive into human psyche, and a lot of people believe that this was kind of Sylvia Plath's almost farewell to the world. Sylvia Plath was known for her poetry, which was absolutely beautiful in its own right, and her journey or descent into depression was hauntingly similar to Esther Greenwood's, in the fact that a lot of scholars believe that Sylvia Plath just wrote her own story here with a fictional character's name. Why this one is on my list? Because this is unlike anything that had ever been written in Sylvia Plath's time. It is a unique book on its own. It left me speechless when I finished reading it. Plath puts everything on the line here. She put everything she had into this and laid her whole heart out on the table. And it's basically poetry in prose form, and it's just hauntingly beautiful. So haunting. Some quotes from The Bell Jar. "I felt myself melting into the shadows. like the negative of a person I'd never seen before in my life. Floppy as the wings of a new angel. And this quote, I never really thought about wings of an angel being floppy, but I love the idea of a new angel having floppy wings. And as they grow into their angelhood, if you will, their wings become sturdier and more reliable. I wondered at what point in space the silly sham blue of the sky turned black. And that just gives you some idea of the prose in the bell jar. So that is my episode 2 of my favorite 100 books read on Goodreads. Like I said before, I will link episode 1 in the description below if you missed that one. And I will have more videos to come as I make my way through all of the books I have read on Goodreads. If you have read any of these books, let me know in the comments below, what did you think of them? Do they belong on your favorite reads list? As always, keep reading, and I love you all to the moon and back. Bye.